Thank you, Mr. President. We thank Vladimir Ivanovich Voronkov and Natalia Meshevna German for the substantive reports on the activities of the units headed by them. We highly appreciate the work of the UN Directorate of Counterterrorism and the Executive Directorate of the Counterterrorism Committee of the UN Security Council. Russia is ready to provide them with all-round support in the future so that the relevant mandates are carried out effectively and in the interests of all member states. Today's meeting is an excellent opportunity for an all-round analysis of the situation in the area of fighting terrorism, identifying problematic places, and determining concrete steps to eliminate them. We have carefully studied the UN Secretary-General's report on the threats posed by the ISIS. We share his assessment that the threat posed by this international terrorist organization is not diminishing. The group is adapting to the new conditions, including changing the geography of its activities. Its activities are increasingly shifting to Africa. The report notes that the ISIS is using a combination of factors to consolidate their presence there, namely political instability, weak state governance, and armed conflicts. However, it is obvious to us that this picture is not complete. A key element has fallen out of it again: the role of Western countries' interference in the internal affairs of the states of the region. The events of the past decades clearly show who paved the way for the terrorists in Africa. The destruction of state institutions in Libya and Iraq as a result of NATO intervention has created a long-term vacuum of power and security which the militants have used. Today, in line with their geopolitical interests, the former metropolises continue to engage in supporting illegal armed formations on the African continent, as well as exploiting local contradictions and socio-economic problems. Stubborn ignorance of these factors in the Secretary-General's profiled analytical materials not only distorts the real picture, but also hinders the development of effective measures. If the real reasons for the instability are not fully explained, the solutions developed will not be effective enough. We strongly condemn the use of terrorism by certain Western countries as a tool of neocolonial policy. The African states have repeatedly stressed that instead of the promised support, they have faced undermining activity. This fact explains well the reasons for the low effectiveness of the so-called multi-year counter-terrorist operations. The slogan of the fight against terrorism served only as a pretext for the continuation of the foreign military presence, which was carried out in line with the interests of the affected states. These approaches are still characteristic of France. The representatives of the governments of the countries of the region regularly share intelligence data that, unfortunately, Paris supports terrorist groups in an attempt to gain control over the former colonies. In this regard, we would like to emphasize once again that international assistance in the sphere of counterterrorism should be carried out strictly at the request of the state. At the same time, specific steps in the framework of the assistance should respect the sovereignty of the requesting state and prevent interference in its internal affairs. We support the decision of the countries of the region to stop the presence of foreign military contingents whose activities do not comply with this principle. This is especially true when, under the pretext of the fight against terrorism, the former colonial powers actually preserved and expanded their military presence, violating the fundamental principles of international law, including the UN Charter. Mr. President, the Kiev regime's actions on the African continent deserve special attention in this context. There are specific facts that clearly indicate that the special services of Ukraine, including the Ministry of Defense, are involved in explosive activities in the Sahel and other regions of Africa. They supply weapons and drones to militants, train them to use them, coordinate the actions of terrorists, including the so-called Islam and Muslim Support Group in Mali, and transfer trained mercenaries to act against local governments. All of this requires a thorough international investigation with the involvement of the UN's competent mechanisms. Mr. President, in accordance with the UN Security Council Resolution 2734, the Secretary-General's reports on threats from the ISIS should contain specific information on the scale of the threat, the sources of terrorist financing, including illegal trade in artifacts, oil and other natural resources. Unfortunately, this document pays minimal attention to this issue. We cannot ignore the serious problem of weapons being seized by terrorists. The report mentions this issue exclusively in reference to it, but the facts speak for themselves. During the operation to liquidate the ISIS cells, warehouses with Western and Eastern European weapons were repeatedly discovered. Thus, the Western weapons supplied to the corrupt Kiev regime continue to flow into various regions of the world, including the areas of ISIS and Al-Qaeda activity. In addition, there is no information on the specific results achieved in the report on the support of state members from the UN. We cannot consider this as a mechanical listing of events, seminars, projects, and programs. In future documents, we would like to see an emphasis on the results achieved on the ground thanks to the support of the UN. We are pleasantly surprised by the inclusion in the report of information on the holding of certain political dialogues on the interrelationship between the fight against terrorism and peacebuilding. We do not separate the thesis that these events are able to lay the foundation for future reviews of peacebuilding architecture and another review of the global counter-terrorism strategy of the UN. We would like to emphasize that we are talking about meetings of separate states promoting their narrow agenda with separate UN structures. Their approaches, which allow for the mixing of the agenda of peacebuilding and counter-terrorism, are not supported by the UN. These are two independent directions, each of which requires specialized tools and resources. Their artificial unity is capable of undermining the effectiveness of the implementation of the primary task of neutralizing the terrorist threat. Mr. President, the report contains alarming signals that the ISIS and the groups associated with it are actively using modern technologies, including artificial intelligence. This is not an abstract threat. We are talking about the creation and dissemination of disinformation, automated recruitment, planning, and operational management of terror attacks. We are convinced that the UN and its member states should take the lead in this area. Cooperation without politicization and double standards is of key importance. In this regard, I would like to emphasize that Russia consistently stands for an honest, unpoliticized, and result-oriented fight against terrorism without any hidden agendas. We are open to cooperation with the member states and UN structures on the basis of the principles of the UN Charter, primarily sovereign equality and non-interference in internal affairs. Only international cooperation, based on mutual respect and dialogue, will help to achieve a stable reduction of the terrorist threat and strengthen international security. In conclusion, it should be noted that the unconstructive and politicized approach of one delegation did not allow the Council to agree on a standard press statement in connection with the terrorist attack in the Iranian city of Zahedan on July 26. This has become a bad tradition.